It's time to get serious here and talk about the state of women's soccer. And in the last year, the major headline has really been about gender equality and equal pay. We know some of the biggest storylines really started by the USA Women. They actually brought their federation to court. They're still in the middle of that. They want equal pay. Ada Hegerberg, who was named the top female player of the year, decided to not partake in the World Cup Norway. She too calling out her federation, saying that they pay more attention and give more money to the men. We want the women to be on equal footing. And then who could forget the images of the great Marta from Brazil at the 2019 World Cup, blacking out her shoes. And every time she scored, made a play, she pointed to them, but in particular pointed to that stripe of blue and pink. That's a symbol she has come up with to promote equality in sport. That has been the big storyline. So we're seeing this movement. People are talking about it. Women are feeling emboldened. But the big question is, where do you go from here? We started the conversation. Where do we go now?
We're so happy the conversation is being had. We're so happy that this is something that seems like there's a future in women's sport, and we're saying that women's sport has grown, but it needs backers. It needs more than just players speaking out. I think that starts at home. I think that starts with federations. Too often we've seen players fighting with their own federations. How is that good for the international team? Even the Jamaican team, recently, it took them an extra couple of weeks to get into camp because they weren't being paid properly. So we need that not to happen. And that means that federation, perhaps, you know, you look at the WNBA, they get certain amount of money from the NBA. Maybe you look at that as an option, particularly in North America. MLS can give some money to a women's league, maybe Canada, maybe the NWSL. But there needs to be more than just people speaking up. There's been a lot of talk. There's been much less action, and that's no longer acceptable.
It's now about getting the backers, right? Having the business plan, having the proper marketing plan, and putting things into action. Where do you see it going from here?
I fully agree with the take on that. I think there's something about unconscious bias, and it's something we encounter every day, where when you invest in men's efforts, initiatives, leagues, etc., it's looked at as an investment. But on the other end, if it's a women's league, you're actually asking the question around, well, what's the loss? What's the return on investment? So it's just a mindset shift that when you actually give equal resources to both, they'll both flourish. So it's from the very beginning. For me, it starts with a mindset. There's also something about the context in women's soccer. Every country is starting at a completely different spot, and we see that in CONCACAF. The realities on the ground at certain countries are very different. So what their plan is to get equality or equity is very different than where we are as Canada. We're already miles ahead with the CPL coming on board, tons of opportunity to learn off of a domestic league, how that works for us. And if we need to pivot for the women's strategy, it probably is going to look a little different.
Yeah, it certainly starts at the grassroots, I think, in a lot of ways. And the grassroots are unfortunately at different stages. There are some countries, of course, in the world that are still fighting for basic human rights when it comes to women. And so that makes things, I mean, particularly difficult.
It's hard to even fathom being in that situation.
Yeah. You can't imagine. We're so lucky coming at it from a Canadian perspective, being able to say, we want a women's league, and we think that there is infrastructure to make that happen. Maybe not tomorrow, but in the near future. There are countries that don't have that, and how do we make that even for everybody across the board? It's a big task.